His breath caught as he saw her again. No longer the woman he left behind, she was glowing, unstoppable, untouchable. The world watched her rise, but he saw the truth. She was the only thing he ever loved. And now? She was the only one who could destroy him. Ryan Carter was not always the man on magazine covers. Once he was just a young entrepreneur chasing an impossible dream, barely scraping by. And through it all, there was one person who stood beside him, Lena Evans. Lena was not just his girlfriend. She was his safe place, his voice of reason. When investors slammed doors in his face, she picked him up. When the bank account ran dry, she still believed in him. Back then, love was simple. A tiny apartment, cheap takeout, and late-night whispers about the future they would build together. But the world changes when money enters the picture. Ryan made it. His company soared, his face was everywhere, and suddenly, he belonged to an exclusive world of wealth and power. The man who once walked the streets with Lena in the rain now sipped champagne with billionaires under glittering chandeliers. And Lena? She did not fit in. She felt the stares at high-profile events, heard the whispers. She is not his level. Why is he still with her? First, Ryan ignored it. But then the words started making sense. That was when Victoria Hayes stepped in. A woman made for the spotlight. A famous actress, flawless and untouchable. She did not just notice Ryan. She convinced him he deserved more. She whispered in his ear, painted a new future where Lena was just a memory. And in one reckless moment, he listened. He left Lena behind, trading love for status, loyalty for ambition. But Lena did not beg. She simply walked away, leaving behind a single painting. An image of their first home. The place where love once meant everything. Ryan thought it was over. He had no idea that fate was about to prove him wrong. Success was supposed to bring happiness. But as Ryan Carter sat in his penthouse, staring at the city that once felt like a dream, he could not ignore the emptiness creeping in. He had everything: wealth, power, status. But something was missing. Or rather someone. Lena had always believed in him. When his pockets were empty, when investors laughed him out of meetings, she stood beside him. Back then, love was effortless. Late-night conversations, shared dreams, promises whispered under flickering streetlights. But the man Lena fell in love with? He was gone. Ryan was a stranger now. His words, once filled with ambition and warmth, had turned cold and distant. The love in his eyes had dimmed, replaced by something else, something Lena did not recognize. First, she ignored it, told herself he was just busy, that the late-night meetings and extravagant parties were part of his success. But deep down, she knew. She saw it in the way his grip on her hand loosened at events. How he introduced her to people as if she were an afterthought. She was no longer his partner. She was a shadow in his world of flashing cameras and whispered judgments. And the whispers, they were the worst part. They surrounded her at every gala, lurking behind forced smiles and empty compliments. She could feel their eyes scanning her, dissecting her presence. She does not belong here. He could do so much better. They never said it out loud. They did not have to. Ryan heard them too. At first, he brushed them off. But then he started believing them. And that was when Victoria Hayes made her move. She was everything Lena was not: polished, powerful, untouchable. A woman who did not walk into a room. She owned it. Ryan was drawn to her confidence, her effortless charm. But it was her words, whispered like a secret, that planted the seed of doubt in his mind. You deserve someone who understands this world, Ryan. Someone who can stand beside you, not behind you. He did not respond. He did not have to. Because silence was its own kind of betrayal. Lena felt it before it even happened. Love was no longer easy. No longer something they shared freely. It felt like a burden now, something Ryan had to carry. And she knew the moment was coming. The moment he would finally say the words she had been dreading. But when it came, it was not an explosion. Not a screaming match. Not a dramatic fight. It was quiet. Cold. Almost rehearsed. Lena, this is not working anymore. No anger. No hesitation. Just the end of everything. But Lena did not beg. She did not ask why. She just left. And as Ryan watched her walk away, he told himself it was for the best. He convinced himself that wealth, power, and status were worth more than love. He believed it, until the day he realized he had made the worst mistake of his life. The night had a heaviness to it, the kind that comes before a storm. The air was thick with tension, with words left unsaid for too long. Ryan stood by the window, his back to Lena, his reflection staring back at him from the glass. He had been avoiding this. Avoiding her. Avoiding the truth. Lena's voice was barely above a whisper. "Ryan, when did we stop being us?" He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. He knew the answer, but saying it out loud made it real. Maybe we were never meant to last. The words hung between them, heavier than he expected. He did not mean to say them. Not like that. Not so cold. But the second they left his lips, he saw it, how they cut through her like broken glass. She blinked once, twice, as if trying to make sense of what she had just heard. "Say that again." Her voice was steady, but her hands were trembling. Ryan did not say a word, because the silence said enough. A soft, amused chuckle came from behind them. "Victoria!" She was standing in the doorway, her arms crossed, her lips curved into the faintest smirk. Lena turned her head slightly, just enough to see her in her peripheral vision. And that was when she knew. Ryan had already made his choice. The betrayal was not in the words he spoke. It was in the hesitation. The doubt. The fact that he had let another woman plant roots in the space they once called love. She swallowed hard, her gaze dropping to the floor for only a second before she met his eyes again. "I hope she was worth it." Victoria let out a quiet laugh, shaking her head. "It is not about worth, sweetheart. It is about reality. And in his world you do not fit." Ryan flinched. He should have stopped her. He should have told Lena that was not true. That it was not about fitting in but about losing himself in a life he no longer recognized. But once again he said nothing. And silence, it seemed, was a language of its own. Lena did not fight. She did not yell. She did not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small canvas wrapped in brown paper. She placed it gently on the table between them. "I was going to surprise you with this." Ryan furrowed his brows, glancing at the gift, then back at her. "What is it?" Lena gave him a sad smile. "A memory." She turned on her heels and walked toward the door, her steps measured, her spine straight. Victoria watched her leave, then turned to Ryan, waiting for him to say something, anything. But he was frozen. When the door finally shut behind Lena, an unfamiliar weight settled in his chest. He let out a breath he had not realized he was holding, then reached for the package, tearing the brown paper away with shaking hands. And then he saw it. A painting. Their first home. That tiny rundown apartment where they spent sleepless nights dreaming about a future they were supposed to build together. The place where he became who he was. The place where she loved him before the world knew his name. For the first time in years, silence filled the space. No laughter. No warmth. Just the echo of a mistake too big to undo. And in that moment, Ryan Carter realized regret looks different when you are the one left behind. The headlines told one story. Ryan Carter and Victoria Hayes, Hollywood's golden couple. The power duo that owns the red carpet. Success. Wealth. Perfection. But behind the flash of cameras and the perfectly curated smiles, Ryan Carter was drowning. Every event, every staged moment felt like a performance. His life was a press release. A polished lie. At night, he scrolled through social media, staring at old pictures. A younger version of himself. Happier. Simpler. Lena. She was not in his world anymore, but somehow she was everywhere. Victoria walked into the penthouse, phone in hand, rattling off updates. "You have an exclusive shoot next week. Wear the navy suit. The sponsors like it. And stop frowning. People are noticing." Ryan barely looked up. "Not now, Victoria." She sighed, walking over, pressing her hands against his shoulders. "Not now." Ryan, this is your life now. You do not just get to check out. We have brands watching, partnerships to maintain. Everything you do affects both of us. She kissed his cheek, but it felt like ownership. This was not love. It was business. A deal. And he was suffocating. Conversations with Lena had been effortless. They talked about dreams, about fears, about the future. Now, Ryan, your watch is from the wrong collection. Wear the platinum one at the gala. Ryan, do not sit near them. It is bad optics. Ryan, I booked you an interview next week. The narrative is shifting in our favor. Narrative. Everything was about perception. It had been months since he had a real conversation. When had he stopped living? When had he become just another headline? The penthouse was beautiful. Glass walls. A skyline that stretched for miles. It was everything he once wanted. So why did it feel so empty? He sat at the bar, drink in hand, staring at the city lights. Something was missing. Or maybe someone. But saying that out loud would mean admitting the truth. Admitting he had made a mistake. And Ryan Carter never made mistakes. Right? Success meant nothing when he had no one to share it with. Ryan Carter sat at the head of the table, surrounded by the powerful, the beautiful, the envied. Crystal glasses clinked, laughter filled the air, and deals worth millions were made between sips of champagne. But when he looked around, he saw strangers. No warmth. No connection. Just people who smile for the cameras, for their own gain, for the next opportunity. He raised his glass, forcing a smirk as they toasted his latest venture. Yet, in the back of his mind, there was only silence. And in that silence was her. Late that night, sleep evaded him. The penthouse was cold, lifeless, despite the luxury. Ryan found himself reaching for an old storage box, buried under years of neglect. His fingers trembled as he pulled out the painting. Their first home. The tiny apartment where they laughed at their struggles, where Lena used to dance barefoot in the kitchen, where she kissed him like he was the only thing that mattered. It was untouched, preserved like a relic from another life. He exhaled sharply, as if releasing a weight he had carried for too long. But memories have a way of haunting the unforgiven. What if I chose differently? The question clawed at his mind. He had everything, the wealth, the status, the dream. Then why did it feel like he had lost the only thing that truly mattered? Ryan clenched his jaw, gripping the edges of the painting as if holding on to the past could rewrite it. But time was not forgiving, and regret had no mercy. The fall begins slowly. A missed meeting, a careless mistake in a deal, a headline that did not flatter. Victoria noticed first. You are distracted, Ryan. He did not deny it. I am fine. Her eyes narrowed. Fine? Fine does not pay for this life. Fine does not keep you on top. But he was slipping. And deep down, he did not care anymore. Because mistakes like his do not just disappear. They come back. And soon his would too. The headlines exploded overnight. Victoria Hayes, caught in a luxury hotel suite with another man. The world gasped. The industry whispered. But Victoria? She just laughed. It's nothing personal, Ryan, she had said, slipping on her designer sunglasses. Just business. Her voice was calm, detached, like this was nothing more than another publicity stunt. For her, it probably was. But for Ryan, it was the moment he realized he was just another name in the game. A pawn on a board where love was nothing more than an illusion. The news channels speculated. Was it betrayal? Was their romance over? Ryan stared at the flashing headlines. Millionaire Ryan Carter betrayed by A-list star. He wanted to feel something. Anger. Heartbreak. Anything. But all he felt was exhaustion. There was a time when he built things. When his hands created, his mind innovated, and his ideas meant something. Now he was a brand. A product. They told him what to say, where to stand, when to smile. Every interview was scripted. Every statement rehearsed. Victoria's team ensured that. At charity galas, he stood next to her like a mannequin, dressed in tailored suits that cost more than the apartment he once shared with Lena. He repeated the same lines, shook the same hands, played the part perfectly. But behind the doors of his penthouse, there was no applause, no flashing cameras, no warmth, only silence. And in that silence, the questions crept in. When did I stop living? When did I become just another character in someone else's story? The tabloids painted a version of Ryan Carter that he barely recognized. Once he had been a self-made innovator, a man with dreams bigger than his reality. Now he was a headline, a gossip piece, a spectacle for the world to consume. He stared at the latest magazine cover. His own face stared back, hollow and distant. The caption read, "Ryan Carter, from tech visionary to Hollywood's latest drama." His achievements, his struggles, his sacrifices, none of it mattered anymore. All the world saw was a man tangled in scandals, standing beside a woman who never truly loved him. He tossed the magazine onto the table, its glossy pages spreading open like a cruel joke. The man in the reflection was a stranger. And the worst part? He had done this to himself. The penthouse had everything. High ceilings, floor-to-ceiling windows, imported furniture. Every inch screamed luxury. But it was not a home. Home had been a tiny apartment where Lena curled up beside him on rainy nights, sketching in her notebook while he mapped out his next big idea. Home was laughter in the kitchen, midnight conversations, love without conditions. His contact list was endless: business partners, publicists, investors. But not one name he could call. Not one person who would sit beside him without an agenda. He poured himself a drink. The whiskey burned down his throat, numbing the weight of loneliness for just a moment. Just long enough to forget. Forget that he had chosen this. Numbers never lied. The reports were clear: his company was failing. Investors were backing out. Stock values were plummeting. The same people who once praised him were now whispering behind closed doors. Carter has lost focus. Too caught up in the spotlight. They were right. He had been too busy playing a role. Too distracted by fame, by Victoria, by a life that was never really his. He gripped the glass tighter, staring at his own reflection in the amber liquid. The man looking back at him was barely holding on. And for the first time in years, Ryan Carter felt something real. Regret. Lena could have drowned in heartbreak. The weight of his betrayal pressed down, but she refused to be crushed. She had given Ryan everything: her love, her loyalty, her belief in his dreams. And in return, he had walked away without a second glance. But if he thought she would disappear, he was wrong. Pain had a way of shaping people, and Lena was about to become someone he would never recognize. She packed her bags with steady hands. No hesitation, no farewell notes, no lingering looks. The city had never truly been hers. It belonged to the ones who whispered behind her back, who measured love in wealth and status. A quiet town, a slower life, and the freedom to create. This was where she would begin again. The first stroke of paint was hesitant, then another, and another. Her hands moved instinctively, pouring every unspoken word onto the canvas. The memories were raw: Ryan's laughter, his promises, the way he once looked at her. But as each color bled into the next, something changed. She was not painting heartbreak anymore. She was painting strength, survival. And soon, people noticed. It started with a single post. A photo of her artwork, a caption about love, loss, and starting over. Then came the comments, strangers resonating with her pain, her journey. The shares multiplied. Messages poured in. Lena, once invisible in Ryan's world, was now a name people whispered with admiration. She was no longer just a girl he left behind. She was an artist, a storyteller, a survivor. The invitations came next. Galleries wanted to showcase her work. Interviews, collaborations, opportunities she had never imagined. The same circles that once dismissed her now sought her out. But Lena had learned her lesson. She was no longer the girl waiting to be chosen. She chose herself. Then an email. A buyer interested in one of her most personal paintings. Her fingers hovered over the name. It was familiar, too familiar. Ryan Carter. Fate had a cruel sense of humor. He had not looked for her when she was struggling, but now that she had found her light, he wanted a piece of it. The past was knocking on her door, but this time she held all the power. She exhaled, steady and sure. The decision was hers. Would she let him in, or was he just another closed chapter? Victoria had played her role, and now she was done. The cameras were rolling, the audience hanging on her every word. She tilted her head, flashing that perfect smile, and delivered the final blow. Ryan Carter? She laughed, shaking her head. That was just a stepping stone. Nothing more. The crowd gasped. The headline spread like wildfire. The man once admired, envied, was now a public joke. The woman he had chosen over Lena had discarded him without a second thought. He scrolled through the comments, each one sharper than the last. I knew it. She was using him all along. Imagine losing the love of your life for this. But the worst part? The messages from people who had once called him a friend. They were not offering support. They were distancing themselves, as if his failure was contagious. The party was grand, chandeliers glistening, laughter ringing through the air. Ryan sat in a velvet booth, a glass in his hand, drowning in the noise. A woman in a glittering dress leaned in, her perfume overwhelming. Smile, Ryan. People are watching. Smile. Always smile. The mask had to stay on. He raised his glass, forced a grin. They toasted to success, to money, to a life that felt hollow. His phone buzzed. Another notification. More noise. But not a single call from someone who truly mattered. He put the glass down and left without a word. No one noticed. His fingers mindlessly scrolled through his phone, looking for nothing and everything at once. The memories blurred past. Pictures of lavish vacations, magazine covers, meaningless celebrations. And then it stopped. A painting. His painting. The one Lena had made once upon a time when love had been enough. A familiar signature at the bottom. Lena Evans. His breath caught. He was not searching for her, but fate had delivered her name anyway. He stared at the screen, his heart pounding. She was still out there. Still painting, still creating, and she was doing it without him. She was more than surviving. She was thriving. Every article, every interview spoke of her brilliance. Lena Evans, the artist who turned Heartbreak into masterpieces. People lined up for her work. Critics praised her talent. Collectors fought to own a piece of her. The same world that had once ignored her was now celebrating her. And Ryan? He was a ghost, a man who had everything only to lose the one thing that mattered. The realization was unbearable. His empire was built on sand, and now it was slipping through his fingers. He put the phone down and ran a hand through his hair. For the first time in years, he felt something real. Regret. He had not said her name in years. Now it was the only word that mattered. Ryan's fingers hovered over the keyboard, searching. Article after article, interview after interview, her name was everywhere. Lena Evans. The world had embraced her, celebrated her. And yet, not a single mention of him. It was as if he had never existed in her story. He scrolled through a gallery's website, his heart tightening. There it was, a painting he recognized instantly. The brushstrokes, the colors, the raw emotion. It was their home. The one they had dreamed of. The one she had painted for them. And now it was up for auction at a charity gala. The night of the event, he stood at the entrance, his breath shallow. The hall was alive with voices, laughter, flashes of cameras. People who had once sought him out now brushed past without a second glance. But it did not matter. There was only one reason he was here. Her name glowed on the guest list. He had practiced 1,000 apologies, but standing there, hands trembling, he realized none of them would ever be enough. Inside, the air was thick with wealth and admiration. Conversations hummed, champagne glasses clinked, and beneath the glow of the chandeliers she stood. Lena. She was laughing, head tilted back, eyes full of life. The weight of the past had not broken her, it had shaped her into something even more brilliant. She looked different, not just in the way she carried herself, but in the way she owned the space around her. Ryan's feet felt heavy. He had expected heartbreak, maybe even regret in her eyes. Instead, there was something worse. Indifference. Every step toward her felt impossible. But he had to do this. He had to face her. And then she turned. For a moment, time stopped. The noise around them faded. There was only the weight of the past pressing between them, heavy and unspoken. Her gaze met his. And in that instant, he knew. He was no longer part of her world. And maybe he never would be again. His voice was quieter than he intended. I made a mistake. The words barely escaped his lips, yet they carried the weight of every regret he had buried. The gala's noise faded into nothing. The clinking of glasses, the murmur of guests, the distant flashes of cameras, it all disappeared. It was just the two of them, standing on opposite sides of a history he had ruined. Lena did not flinch. She did not rush to respond. She only looked at him, her gaze unreadable as if she was measuring the weight of his words. And somehow that silence was more terrifying than anger. She had once held every answer he needed. She had once been the one person who believed in him. But standing here now, he realized something chilling. He had never really known her at all. His voice was strained, raw. "Lena, say something. Please." She exhaled softly as if considering whether to grant him that mercy. Her hands were steady, unlike his. "What do you want me to say? That I waited? That I spent years hoping you would come back?" She shook her head. "I did not." Her words were not bitter. They were not meant to wound. And yet they struck him deeper than any accusation ever could. His chest tightened. "You have every right to hate me. I deserve it." Lena tilted her head slightly, studying him as if seeing him for the first time. "I do not hate you, Ryan. That would mean you still have power over me." For the first time, he felt it. The emptiness. The irreversible nature of what he had lost. He had told himself he could fix things, that he could find the right words to turn back time. But time did not bend for regret. She had moved on. She had grown. And he had been left behind. His voice cracked. Was it all a lie? What we had? Did it mean nothing? Lena's gaze softened, but she did not reach for him. It meant everything. And that is why I will not let you ruin it with an apology. His breath hitched. So this is it? You walk away again. A sad smile played on her lips. Ryan, I was never the one who walked away. The reality of her words settled deep in his bones. The past was not something he could rewrite. And Lena? She was no longer his to hold on to. He took a shaky step back as she turned, her figure disappearing into the sea of people, her presence slipping from his grasp for the last time. The love they had once shared had ended years ago. But the question lingered in the space between them, unspoken, unresolved. Had it ever truly ended at all? Ryan stood there, searching for the right words. But for the first time in his life, words were not enough. He had spent years building a world that was no longer his, chasing something that had cost him everything. Now the only thing that mattered was the woman in front of him, the one he had lost. "I made a mistake." His voice was quieter than he had intended. The crowd around them blurred into nothing. It was just the two of them now, standing in the middle of a world that no longer felt real. Lena did not move, did not react. She just looked at him, her expression unreadable. And that silence, calm, measured, weighty, was far more terrifying than anger. There was no rage, no accusation. Just a quiet, knowing stillness. Had he ever really seen her? Truly understood who she was? The thought struck him harder than he expected. Maybe that had been his mistake all along, assuming he knew her when he had never really tried to. "I do not expect anything," he continued. I just need you to know that I regret everything." She let out a small breath, not quite a sigh, but something close to it. Then finally she spoke. "Ryan, I forgave you a long time ago. I just had to learn to forgive myself first." Her words hit him harder than anything he had prepared for. He had spent all this time wanting to make things right, to undo the past. But Lena had already moved forward. She had already healed. And he was the only one still stuck in a moment that no longer existed. She smiled then. Not cruelly. Not bitterly. Just knowingly. A soft final nod. And in that moment Ryan knew. Some doors were not meant to be reopened. Some things were not his to fix. The past was done, and Lena was not looking back. Before she turned to leave, she reached into her bag and handed him something. A smaller version of the painting. The one that had once held all their dreams. A reminder, she said. And then she walked away. He held the canvas in his hands, staring at the brushstrokes, feeling the weight of it. This was not a second chance. This was closure. As he watched her disappear into the crowd, reality settled in. This was not the reunion he had imagined. This was an ending. And maybe that was exactly what he needed to finally move forward. A love that could have been, but was never enough. Ryan stood motionless, staring at her as if waiting for the past to rewrite itself. But Lena did not waver. Her eyes met his with a steadiness that made the air between them heavy. The years had changed her, carved strength into her posture, painted wisdom into her silence. She had once searched for answers in his face, but now she searched for nothing at all. I know I hurt you. Ryan's voice was raw, like a man grasping at something already gone. I know I let you go when I should have fought for you. Lena's expression did not shift. There had been a time when his words would have shattered her. Now they were just echoes of an old story she had long since closed. The words he feared most. I waited for you, Ryan. Her voice did not waver, but the weight of it pressed into the space between them. I waited for you, Ryan. He inhaled sharply, as if hearing those words broke something inside him. She had been there in the shadows of his choices, hoping, believing, that he would see her before it was too late. But he never had. I thought if I was patient, if I gave you time, you would remember what we had. She exhaled softly, the ache of old wounds barely present in her tone. But I was wrong. His hands clenched at his sides. I was blind, Lena. I see that now. Her lips curved, not in anger or bitterness, but in something far more terrifying to him, acceptance. Regret in his eyes, but was it too late? He reached for her, desperation flickering in his movements, but Lena stepped back. The space between them stretched, widening into something insurmountable. His chest tightened. Do not do this. She studied him, unhurried, unaffected by the panic behind his words. Do what? Walk away. Not now. Not when I finally... He stopped himself, the words tasting like regret before they even left his lips. Her eyes softened, but not with the mercy he craved. Ryan, you lost me long before you even noticed I was gone. A love rewritten, the decision that changes everything. He had come here expecting pain, maybe anger, but not this. Not a version of Lena who no longer needed closure from him. She took a slow breath, her voice steady, final. I am not angry anymore. The words should have been a comfort, but instead they shattered him, because it meant she had healed. Without him. This is not how our story ends. His voice was barely a whisper. Lena studied him for a long moment, then smiled, soft, knowing, unbreakable. Ryan, our story ended a long time ago. You were just not there to see it. She turned, walking away without hesitation, without looking back. And in that moment he finally understood, some things are not meant to be rewritten. She had already said goodbye. He just did not know it yet. 200 words. Ryan stands before her, eyes pleading, searching for something, anything that says she still cares. But Lena is unmoved. She does not hesitate, does not falter. Instead, she smiles, not cruelly, not sadly, but knowingly. Thank you, Ryan, she says, her voice even controlled. His breath catches. For what? For showing me that I deserved better. That I was more than someone waiting in the shadows for you to notice. The words struck deep. He had imagined 1,000 ways this moment could unfold. But this was worse than anger. Worse than tears. This was final. No second chances, he asks, desperation seeping through. Lena exhales softly, shaking her head. I already said goodbye, Ryan. You just did not hear it. The noise of the gala fades. The people around them blur into nothing. All Ryan can see is Lena turning away, walking toward the exit, toward a life that no longer includes him. He should stop her. He should say something. But his throat tightens, words failing him. And then she is gone. The weight of the moment settles in his chest. He has lost people before. He has made mistakes. But this is the one that will haunt him for the rest of his life. He looks around. The world continues. People laugh, talk, dance. But he remains frozen, staring at the space where she once stood, feeling the full weight of what he has lost. The night stretches on, but Ryan does not move. The gala ends, the lights dim, the crowd thins. Yet he stands there, alone in the emptiness, drowning in memories that refuse to fade. She had been his safe place once. The one person who saw beyond the headlines and the wealth. And he had let her go. For what? Status? Power? A love that was never real? His fingers tighten around the glass in his hand. He thought losing her once was painful. But losing her a second time? Knowing she chose to walk away? That is a different kind of agony. A different man stands before her, but can she trust it? 200 words, Ryan does not beg. He does not plead. He simply stands before her, exposed, vulnerable. I am not here to ask for love, Lena. I am here to ask for time. She studies him, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Time for what? To prove that I am not the man who hurt you. To show you that I can be better. Lena exhales, her fingers brushing against the stem of her wine glass. Ryan, people do not change overnight. I know, he admits. But I want to try. And I will not ask for anything more than that. Silence stretches between them. Finally she nods, but it is cautious. Then prove it. There is no dramatic embrace. No grand declarations. Just two people standing before each other, neither chasing, neither running. I am not saying yes, Lena clarifies, her voice firm. And I am not expecting you to, Ryan replies. For the first time in years, they stand as equals. Not as the woman who once waited in the shadows, nor the man who took her for granted. Just Lena. Just Ryan. I do not believe in fairy tales, Ryan, she says softly. He offers a small smile. Neither do I. But I believe in second chances. She looks at him for a long moment before nodding. Then we will see. The night air is crisp as they step outside together. There are no guarantees. No promises of love reborn. Just two people willing to see where the road leads. Ryan does not reach for her hand. He does not need to. For now, walking beside her is enough. Lena steals a glance at him. Do not disappoint me, Ryan. I will not, he replies. Not this time. And for the first time, he means it. Ryan had spent his life believing love was about possession. That holding on to something meant it was his forever. But as he stood there, watching the only woman who had ever truly known him, he understood the truth. Love was not about keeping someone. It was about being there before it was too late. Lena, I should have been better. His voice was softer now, the arrogance stripped away. I thought I had time. She exhaled, not with anger, not with relief, just acceptance. That was the problem, Ryan. You always thought there would be a later. The weight of her words settled in his chest like stone. Love had not been something to win or to control. It had been something to nurture, to cherish in the moment, not when it was convenient. For the first time in his life, he did not try to argue. He did not beg. He just let the silence say everything he had been too blind to see before. The hardest thing about love is that sometimes it does not last. But that does not mean it did not matter. Ryan had thought their story was unfinished, that there would be another chapter. But now, standing before Lena, he realized that love did not always come with a second chance. Sometimes love was just a lesson, a beautiful, painful, unforgettable lesson. Lena smiled, not in sadness, but in understanding. You were part of my story, Ryan. But you are not the ending. Her words did not carry malice nor bitterness. They were simple, honest. She had found peace. And maybe for the first time, Ryan understood what that meant. He had lost her long before this moment. The difference was, now he finally knew it. Love leaves its mark. Whether it is through regret or redemption, it shapes who we become. Ryan had learned his lesson, but was it too late? If you were Lena, what would you do? Would you give him another chance, or would you walk away forever? Let us know in the comments below, because in the end, love is a story we all write together.